Right now, in 2023, we're allowing AI to decide who lives and who dies.
I believe that is the case.
Joshua Vogelstein, he's a biomedical engineer. He's an associate professor at Johns Hopkins University, and his work is focused on the intersection of natural and artificial intelligence.
So many smart people who are devoted to AI as a community and as a field have encouraged us to slow down and stop until we get a better handle on what's going on and how to regulate it in a way that's safe for everybody. Many other people have said slowing it down is a terrible decision because it's going to solve all the problems, and so let's accelerate it.
I think even problems are relative, like what we define as a problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How can it solve all our problems if we're not in agreement with the problems actually are?
And that's a huge problem.
Men, the world is asking for you to stand up, to show up, to move forward in a new way. The pathway of embodied leadership is here. And where we're going, we go together. Using time-tested masculine frameworks for modern men who are ready to take ownership of their life. Guided by directions, elements, growth edge challenges, weekly rituals, and the 7 pillars of embodiment. Train directly with the leaders of Sacred Sons at Prime Leadership. Grow alongside your brothers in Leadership Training 1, or grow at your own pace with the Embodied Masculine course. Because together, we are more. Join this global movement today. Grand Rising Sacred Sons, Adam Jackson here with another episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. Brothers and sisters, what is real? What is natural versus artificial? In a world with so much actual pain, suffering, loss that is being experienced on a collective level, what is actually real? How do you know that the experience you're having through the technology, through the lens, is something that you can trust versus the experience that we have through our eyes and through our hearts? And with that, today's guest, Joshua Vogelstein, he's a biomedical engineer. He's an associate professor at Johns Hopkins University, and his work is focused on the intersection of natural and artificial intelligence. Please welcome Joshua Vogelstein.
Thank you, brother.
Here we are, and you are coming off of a silent retreat a couple of weeks ago, and you're coming back into a world of chaos. We were just talking about kind of the global climate and what's happening, and want to take an opportunity to check in and to deepen into what's real for you. So with that, I want to invite us to take a deep breath in. Joshua, on this beautiful day, what is really alive within you?
Thank you. So appreciate the question and the opportunity to check in. You know, for me, recently there's been a lot of yes ands, like myself, my beloved wife, my children. It's amazing. It's beautiful. We're so deeply in love and supportive of each other, like at a whole new level. But I look out and there's just so much suffering and so much pain. My family and my friends, my community, the world, the more than human world is just, when I open my eyes and look around, I cry. I feel a little heartbreak most days. And then I zoom out the bigger picture, the cosmos, and it's all good. And so it kind of just depends where I'm directing my energy. And often I try to maintain looking at all of it, all the scales, feeling all of it, and being with it.
Yeah. That's one of the things I appreciate about you is even amidst this chaos, this turmoil and this war, like I can call you on the phone and we can talk about what's real. You know, like I think that's an important thing to have in this world is, you know, someone who can just be honest with. And, you know, I think what's happening is impacting many people in many ways, but is there any piece that you want to share about how it's impacting your family or maybe your direct community?
Yeah, you know, my background, my grandmother was born in Palestine. Her parents fled Eastern Europe. There were pogroms, massacres of Jewish communities. And so my great-grandfather, when he was 14 years old, walked from Kiev in the Ukraine to what was then Palestine, through all the Arab countries, because it was safer than going through Europe.
Wow.
And so when I think about what's happening now, I think of that, and there's a time for this and there's a time for not this. And this is what's happening now, but a generation ago, it wasn't happening. Maybe longer than that. 100 years ago, it was okay. So there's waves, and there's waves globally and there's waves locally. So some days I'm crying, and some days I'm optimistic that this will be shedding of something so that something more beautiful and more loving can come through.
Yeah, it's a good perspective to have, to recall on the past. And it's also a good perspective to have is like, the waves come, let those tears come when they need to. And then let's shift back into what's right in front of us. I think that's important too, because if we stay stuck in it, for me, like I'm speaking, I get stuck in those waves of scrolling through war footage. I'm just like deeply impacted, and it's not my reality. And at some level, I'm like, is it even real? How do I know what's being shown to me is the truth? And that goes, at this point, it's a daily fight to know what is real. And I believe, and maybe you can shed some light on this, it's going to become more and more difficult to know what is real. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it's always been difficult. Before the internet, before books, like, how did you know what was real? Someone told you what they saw somewhere else where they went, and you could believe it or not. And now there's all sorts of other ways of creating disinformation and misinformation. But I think the creation of that kind of narrative has always been here with us and will probably always be here. And it serves its purpose also. So there's a physicist woman I really appreciate, Sabina, who has a podcast called Science Without the Gobbledygook. And she has this episode where she talks about how great pseudoscience is. And without getting into the details, what she points out is when we can really hone in on the pseudoscience, we can figure out and use it to see how do we discern more effectively? How do we discern what counts as strong evidence or what does not count as strong evidence? So I'd like to think that we can use the disinformation and misinformation. And the way I use it internally for myself is I see how I feel when I read it, anything. Oh, I feel sad, I feel angry. Okay, notice that. And then how is it true?
Right. Yeah, I think pseudoscience is a form of storytelling in a way. And storytelling is a part of human nature, And so you are someone who is actually developing artificial intelligence. And the big thing that's being said out there is it's not even artificial and it's not true intelligence. What is your understanding or definition of AI?
Yeah, it's a really fun question for me to think about. So we'll just take the first word, artificial. What's artificial? Literally everything in nature. There's nothing else. All of the elements in our body come from exploding stars billions of years ago. That's everything. So the idea that there can be something artificial harks back to this time where people used to, and maybe some people still think, that humans are somehow above nature and therefore can create things that aren't nature but are artificial.
Right. I
don't think that's true. I think it's all natural. Some of it I don't like bee stings, natural. I don't like them that much when it happens, but doesn't make it artificial. And then, you think about beehives or beaver dams, things that other animals create. They're not artificial. Why is it the things we create we call artificial? So I'm not in love with the term artificial. Intelligence, also not in love with that term. Intelligence has been used for a long time to oppress lots of people. So some of the founders of statistics were into eugenics, using ideas of who's intelligent and who's not to kill people off. Hitler used it. And there's been lots of racism and all sorts of oppression and marginalization based on who's intelligent and who's not.
Right.
And so I think it's a very problematic term also. And like, why are we so committed to ranking intelligences anyway? What are we getting when we say we're smarter? And we're so much smarter than dogs. How come they can track scent so much better than us? How come squirrels can find nuts better than us? Like, it's very, the definition that people use of intelligence is very egocentric typically.
Yeah.
And so in whatever culture is defining it, they're culturally centric.
That's great, because when you look at a beehive in all its complexity, in all of the roles that each of the bees has to play in it, we don't really think like, oh man, those bees are so smart. They're so intelligent. It's like, no, they're operating on instinct, which is derived from ancestral knowledge. Even bees have ancestors, okay? And like the knowledge that they have to create that hive comes directly from their lineage. And so as human beings, we have to like come out of this idea of ranked intelligence, like what you're speaking to, and come back into like wisdom, knowledge, understanding. These are things to value, and they don't come necessarily from reading books. They come through our gut. They come from instinct. They come from being human. And the fear that I have is like we're moving further and further away from that instinct and from what it means to be human. And so the question I have for you is, as you're developing this, like, what are some of the ethical implications that you consider when putting a new tool out there that could be used for good, could be used for harm, but like when we're developing this quote unquote intelligence, like, yeah, how are we doing it in a good way? Or are we?
Yeah. Well, I'd say probably some of us are and some of us maybe not. To me, AI, it's not special in the sense of it's a powerful tool, like nuclear. You can use nuclear to commit genocide. You can use it to power the homes of people that don't have access to other resources. Like, It's not inherently good or bad. It's whose hands is it in and how are those people using it?
Well, so the difference is nuclear power is not in the hands of some 14, 15-year-old kid, in his bedroom. AI will be. It is, and it will become more and more vastly accessible.
Yeah. So, with regards to that and AI, I'd say the current state of the world is that the people who are moving and really making waves in the AI community are a very small number of people from a very homogeneous ethnicity and background and culture. It's essentially a bunch of white 40 to 50-year-old college educated rich dudes, and who are not accountable to the public. So they're not representative or accountable. And I think whenever you have very powerful technology in the hands of a very small number of homogeneous people, whatever their background, you're in trouble. Like, that's not what we want as a society. We want powerful tools to be in the hands of the people so we can decide, ideally even in the more than human world, so we can collectively decide how should we do this in service of the collective flourishing.
Yeah. I like that idea, but it seems like if it's coming from humans and humans are corruptible or corrupted, then the technology, the programming, the algorithm, like you're saying, will be maybe tuned to the homogeneous people who developed it. There's been small examples. Like, what are they? AI generated art, and you're like, make a picture of a beautiful woman and it makes all the features European features, or really like this. This is like a really small example, but does that get exacerbated on a larger scale? Is there a real danger here? Is really my question.
First of all, I want to say I'm not an expert on AI ethics. There are people who are. This is what they study. This is what they know. I develop AI and I have strong opinions, but I would encourage people who are really interested to really seek out experts. And it turns out most of the experts are individuals from marginalized communities, people of color, women, because they're the ones that tend to suffer from these technologies more than others because they're not involved in developing them because they've been ostracized from the community in various ways. So with that said, I think, your example is a great one. It's an issue in very real life, very currently. So for example, credit scores. There's algorithms that are involved in credit scores and that, determines whether you can buy a house. So they're trained on all the historical data. Well, the historical data has the biases of the humans who are involved in making credit scores, that particular homogeneous group. So now the algorithms have that bias too, and often exacerbate that bias. And so now it's even more difficult to get good credit and get home loans because we're using algorithms that have essentially internalized these biases that a segment of the population has. And it's not just credit scores, it's happening everywhere. So another really good example is like if you looked up for a long time in any of the search engines, a particular group of people or ethnicity. Like for example, if you looked up African American women, you got porn sites. Now, it used to be if you looked up African American women, you'd go to a library, you'd get an encyclopedia, you talk to a librarian, you'd get relatively good information about history and culture and all sorts of beautiful information. Because of the rise of this technology, encyclopedias and libraries and librarians are now not really funded, not really available. And so you don't have access to that kind of relatively unbiased information. And you do have all of this. And so we're all getting it. It's all like in our minds all the time. Whatever people have generated, whoever generates more information, that's the information that goes into our minds and impacts our implicit biases all the time.
Yeah, it's like the dehumanization that occurs within the mind of the developer gets blasted out into the ether. And then when someone who is quote unquote innocent comes along with a question, it brings along those biases. And therein lies the problem with calling it intelligence. Because, I mean, true knowledge is multifaceted. And so it's not just what pops up at the top of a Google search that defines it. However, our society is like trending towards that way, right? Like whatever collectively comes to the top, that's what we accept as truth. But from here, so is there a potential for a positive societal impact utilizing AI as a tool?
For sure. I think there's many ways we can imagine this going. And people talk about dystopian futures and utopian futures. So the utopian futures is that AI solves all sorts of problems for us that we currently haven't solved, and therefore there's no more people suffering from without living in a home. There's no more hunger. Like we have the resources on Earth to actually support everyone on Earth if we want. We haven't figured out ways to structure society such that the resources get distributed to those people. Mm-hmm. Maybe AI can solve that problem, and if so, the world is better for humans and hopefully also for non-human. But it can also go awry. And like a real way it's going awry now is you have drones that are weaponized. And these exist in Ukraine and Russia right now. They have AI in them, and they can decide whether or not to shoot a person without any human intervention. And in theory, that functionality is turned off. But in practice, I doubt it. My guess is drones are deciding who lives and who dies now.
Right now, in 2023, we're allowing AI to decide who lives and who dies.
I believe that is the case.
Whew. Yeah. I mean, listen, I grew up with RoboCop. I remember thinking like, dude, how terrifying if the police are coming as algorithms and programs in deciding who lives and who dies.
And there's arguments to be made that the robots will be fairer than humans because they're not subject to hate. They're not subject to emotional outbursts, anything like that. And then there's arguments that they just internalize the hate with the algorithms. And so they have it just as much or more.
Wow. And so in your like research, in your practical application and programs, you create algorithms, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, how can we keep or prevent that transfer from happening? Like, is this a moment where we say, hey, wait, maybe we should stop because we're not there?
So many smart people who are devoted to AI as a community and as a field have encouraged us to slow down and stop until we get a better handle on what's going on and how to regulate it in a way that's safe for everybody. Many other people have said slowing it down is a terrible decision because it's going to solve all the problems. And so let's accelerate it. There's debates and,
I think even problems are relative. Like what we define as a problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How can it solve all of our problems if we're not in agreement what the problems actually are?
And that's a huge problem.
Exactly.
I think the truth is it's super complicated, and like people, very good people, have thought about interventions to help make the world a better place, and they've sometimes gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And so just because, even if we agreed on what we wanted the world to look like, which I don't think we do, I don't think we would agree on how to get there. And we just don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. We know what we want it to look like, but we don't know how to get there. And we're not in agreement on how to get there, which is potentially limiting us or preventing us. I wanted to come back to like this problem solving though. I mean, I could actually see how AI could be incredible for managing resource planning or the global supply chain. Is it possible that we could use AI, again, like in the global supply chain? But doing that creates job displacement. It creates a new gap where now AI is able to do some of the tasks or jobs that humans have been able to do, and therefore puts people out of jobs due to automation. This has always been a fear of technology, and I think now it's becoming, for the paper pushers and spreadsheet, gurus out there. Is that something that you're thinking about as a part of the development?
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is, I think historically you're right. Like whenever there's a new technology, there's lots of fear that it will displace jobs. And it often does. And it often creates new jobs. And the relative balance of those two depends on how society structures itself around the new technology. So both are happening currently, and both will continue to happen. And I would like to think that we'll figure out how to do it in such a way that it makes the world better for all of us.
Yeah, in my utopian fantasy, it's like, oh, AI will do all the remedial stuff so I can do art and poetry and just make music, and like do the human things that we all, maybe not all of us, but that many of us have the capacity to just play in, and is that real? Is that possible? I don't think that's what happens actually with technology. I think it creates more jobs, but I think there's also an element where it creates more of a burden. I have a couple friends who are truck drivers, for example, and they're like, the AI automated trucks are coming to take the truck driver jobs. Yeah, I don't know. I think it is something to consider. When you look at it, like America, I was raised in Ohio around General Motors, and when all the manufacturing pulled out of there, I saw what happened to the middle class in Dayton, Ohio. And so is there another wave of that potentially coming?
I think there's certainly a wave of that coming. And there's also the question of like, obviously I love truck drivers. They're great people, nothing against them. But how many trucks do we want on the roads? Like maybe the wave is we move away from trucks, not truck drivers, but trucks. And maybe all those people can be involved in whatever the technology and the ecosystem is developed that doesn't require there being roads everywhere and trucks driving all the time, so that we can use that land for parks and playing and making art.
Yeah. And then, and like that's a beautiful vision, but in the now moment, it's hard to see that, right? If you're the one driving the truck.
Yeah.
And that's how you make your money, right? And provide for your family. It's something to consider. What about us as users of this technology? You're a devoted husband and father. You're a sacred son. Do you have any restrictions? Do you limit the amount of technology in your household? Or being someone on the forefront of AI, are you kind of like doing anything preventative from keeping this technology impacting your children?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I get home, I leave my phone in the car and I take it out of the car until the kids are asleep, because there's nothing the phone has that will make me more present and more connected to my children.
Yeah.
In terms of them, they love screens, and I get it. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry devoted to making us want to look at it and buy it. And they're good at that. And that's not a criticism of them. That's their job. And it took a huge amount of ingenuity and creativity and effort to make them have that property. They did a great job. I try to think about, given that this is a reality that we live in, that our children are going to want to look at screens a lot. How can we channel the energy in them to do it something where it's supportive, so they're learning and growing and expressing themselves? So, for example, my son Lion, who loves video games, I'm trying to get him moving toward using the phone to be a DJ because he loves music.
Wow.
He loves listening to music. So I want him to be creating music with the phone rather than passively receiving information from other people.
Yeah, I like that, the shift from active to passive learning, scrolling, whatever that is. I find a difference. I have little kids. I have a 9-year-old Noah, but I'm thinking about Holland. There's a big difference when I put on something like number blocks, which he's learning and he walks away from counting and doing addition. Then there's this other show called Karate Sheep where they don't even say words. They just do karate and punch each other. Like when he watches that, there's one outcome and he's just running around punching and grunting. And he watches number blocks and he comes away counting and doing addition. So active versus passive.
Right.
I think that's great advice.
And then the other thing is when we're doing it, I try to be really engaged. Like as long as we're connected, I'm connecting with my children, I think the activity probably doesn't matter that much. The fact that we're together and just engaged and feeling and talking to each other, I believe that matters more.
Yeah. Presence.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. As intelligent as we want to make it, will this AI technology ever have presence, love, compassion? Whew. I bet you it's easy to emulate from the movies like Her. You know, we can have like a lover call you on the phone and say everything that you want to hear. I bet you can emulate it.
Right. So people in the field talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence, all the time. And the kind of colloquial definition is it kind of exceeds the level, matches or exceeds human level intelligence, whatever that is. And then there's a question of then, does it have a conscious? Is it sentient? Does it love? Does it feel? Are there ethical considerations now? If it's getting into those kinds of states, do we have to protect it from harm? I think the reality is we're not even close. Like you take the world's best foundation model that people are using now, from ChatGPT from OpenAI, which has been trained on essentially everything ever written, at least in English, that's available on the internet. It can't do very basic things still, the things that 3 and 4-year-olds can easily do. So whatever it's doing, it might be intelligent in some definition. I don't have any like ego in that fight. It's obviously doing something, but it's not doing what we're doing. It's the mechanism of learning is fundamentally different. There's no physical embodiment. There's no literal body. It can't actually do anything. It can just say, well, it can write words. And so it's different in kind in a way that it's not obvious that it makes sense even to compare and evaluate. Like, what does it mean for a tree to love? I don't know what the sentence means.
Yeah. However, if you walk into a forest, particularly a food forest, or even like an apple orchard, do you feel the love? Do you feel the abundance?
Absolutely.
Do you pull an apple off and you taste it and you go, that's love? I mean, it's an experience. Love is an experience. It's not something that can really actually be defined.
Yeah, I mean, I have a practice. There's a tree back there. It's really big, like 300-400-year-old tree. And I have a practice whenever I feel really angry. I walk over to the tree and I say, tree, can you hold my anger for me? And assuming it says yes, I just scream into the tree. And then I feel better.
They can hold it. And, you know, we love to hug a tree. I just talked to this brother, Ian Wogan, about how amazing trees are. But another thing I remember, there was a fallen tree in that backyard. And you had walked out there and you saw the new growth that was like birthing from this seemingly dead now tree. But there was a new growth coming from it. What was the lesson that came to you from that?
Yeah, that tree, that's a beech tree that was right there. That was, you know, the tree fell and then it was months later it became spring and there was just new leaves. And it wasn't connected to its root system at all. And it was mind-blowing to me because I would have thought it was dead. But it's not just that like new life sprung forth, like mushrooms were growing on it, like different things. It still had life in it.
Yes.
And it's just like the stories we have around life and death, like when something is alive and when something is dead. It's just like, it made me realize how that's all story, and like the continuum is infinite, and like what constitutes alive and dead is really, it's not at all clear.
Yeah. So let's go into the consciousness behind all of this, because like I'm saying, you're at the intersection of scientific knowledge and spiritual knowledge. You recently come back from a silent retreat. Was it like a 10-day Vipassana, or how many days did you do?
It was a 7-day, and I didn't go anywhere. I was home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I decided to do it like a staycation. I had just finished this year-long training I was completing from Conscious Leadership Group to be a certified life coach.
Nice.
And it was a really beautiful, intense year. And I wanted to do an integration and really be present to notice like how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. And I have a wife and 3 children, and I wanted to make sure I was there with them, supporting them. And so going away and just being present to what's happening didn't feel aligned for me. So I told them I was going to be home and be supportive of them, and I wasn't going to use any words. And I told my students at my lab, I'm going to come to the meetings and I'm going to be present with you, and I'm not going to use any words. And so it was a week of being with everyone and just never expressing any words to anybody.
What did you gain or glean from that experience?
I loved it. First of all, like, like since then, every time I say anything, almost I'm like, not saying anything would have been better, probably.
Wow. It's the power of not saying anything and just being present.
Yeah. But practice now where it's like, before I speak, I think, are the words I'm going to say going to improve upon the silence that we have now? And like, those have got to be pretty good words, because like the silence is really sweet.
Yeah. And for so many of us, myself included, who knows the agony of putting our foot in our mouths, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, especially in relationship, I find like, sometimes those like moments of argument or tension, you don't even remember what you were fighting about in the first place. Just like saying stupid shit that's meaningless.
Yeah.
You know? I love that sentiment. Like, are we improving upon the silence? And if not, remain silent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's like, I'm just tapping into your spirituality. You've also done many Sacred Sons events. I've seen you jump through and over a gauntlet. You know, I've seen you do the primal work, let's call it, the primal kind of shedding and shadow work. How does your spiritual nature come into this and integrate with your work?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. It's constant. I'd say, one thing I learned from you, I remember one of the first conversations we had, you talked about how you were unifying everything in your life.
Yes.
And I'm in a similar journey. So the personal journey work there was a lot of shadow work and seeing what are the parts of me that I'm unaware of, that I'm not loving, that I'm not connected to, that I've X'd out. And then when I think about my work in the world, like my research, I think about, AI. What's the shadow side of AI? Like, what are we not seeing? What are we avoiding? Or what's the parts that, we're unwilling to face and address? And there's a lot there. I'd say there's a lot there. And it's so it's constant. Seeing the shadow in me, seeing how it's reflected in the shadow of my work, seeing the bigger picture. We step out to the shadow of the community.
Yeah, that's cool. I love looking at the shadow within the development of this technology. And again, it seems like we need to come back to the human operating system first and primarily, because what you're saying, whatever we develop, it's going to hold the energy of the creator of that technology.
Yep. And all the things that we don't see about ourselves will also be in there, including all the hate, all the implicit biases, and all the love. It's all in there.
Yeah. And it's like, you can buy a Tesla And you can feel good with that Model 3, but there's pain, loss, death, slavery in that Model 3 too. Even though it's not using gasoline, it's using cobalt and all of the other precious metals, conflict minerals, you know what I'm saying, that go in to make this thing that makes us feel good to drive down the street because we didn't put gas in it.
Yep.
That's what we do when we're avoiding the shadow. We're like, oh, no, I'm good because I'm doing it this way.
Right.
Man, technology's it's an interesting one to integrate with spirituality, because when I go down that path, I'm like, I don't need any of it. If I was to really monk out here and like go deep into that, I actually don't require any technology.
No. And it's fun.
And it's fun. And it's entertaining, sure.
Yeah. I think for me, the work recently is just deepening into the humility and just realizing, bringing it back to what you were saying before, like what's real. And the truth is, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know what's real. Like, I know what's inside this body. I know the feelings I'm having. I know the sensations. I know the thoughts. But what's real, I don't know. And just like, if we can hold that and just remember that, like, my story is you've got to be pretty certain about something if you're willing to really harm somebody else. Like, really certain that they're going to harm you or that they're bad or whatever. And if we just had a little bit more humility, like, actually, I'm not sure if I'm the bad one or they're the bad one, right? Or maybe there is no bad one.
Maybe there is no bad one. Because that's a story. What is that story that gets implanted in us with good guys versus bad guys? I know it's rooted in tribalism. I know it goes back to that ancestral knowledge, maybe when we were being chased by mountain lions or whatever it was that brought us the initial fear, that brought us that initial fear experience. But even when I think about the feelings, even the fear, even the joy, it's actually just chemical reactions physiologically happening between my brain and body. So is that what's real? Is that chemical reaction? Is that, and then you go down to the atomic level. Is that the source of it? Is that what is real? And so again, when we do this as a thought experiment, it starts to blur the lines. And my question is, how do we remain human amidst it all? And I think doing things like what you did, like let's return to silence. Let's return to nature. Let's go out and talk to a tree and see what knowledge is there. Those are very grounding, beneficial ways.
And real, like, I know, like, these sensations are really happening in my body. I can feel that tree. I can feel the pressure on my hand. I can scream, like I'm really screaming. And then, did I do something wrong or bad? That I have no idea. Did I do something brilliant and loving? Also, no idea. I know I'm screaming at a tree.
Yeah. And you're on this path of becoming a life coach amidst all of the other things that you do. And I imagine it's because you genuinely want to help people. Is that true?
I think, there's a part of me is like, there's a little benevolent narcissist in me where I really love myself and I really want me to be good. So I think a lot of the work and the leadership and the consciousness coaching is all about like deepening into really knowing who I am and being able to show up more in the way I want for my wife, for my kids, and my community in the world.
And so if I was to ask you, Joshua, what is your purpose in this life? What do you have to say?
Well, when I'm holding my baby, it feels really clear. My purpose is like these kids.
Yes.
And then when I zoom out a little bit, the purpose is just like showing up in the world in such a way that my children and your children and the children's children of humans, of animals, of plants can thrive better than they're thriving now, and for whatever it means for them.
Yeah. So your purpose is life, is thriving.
Yeah. I like to say I forge codes that amplify our collective flourishing.
Ooh, that's it. Forging codes to amplify our collective flourishing. That feels good.
I got forged from you, actually. You told me about forging.
Yeah, forging in the flames. And these codes, the codes come in all kinds of ways amidst our community. We get the codes from Kevin Walton, Source Radiance, or from Andrew Huvar with his death codes. And you are the one who's literally actually coding.
I am literally
in the Matrix. Like, if there is such a thing as the Matrix, you are one who is coding it. I think this is accurate that either Microsoft or Apple has bought your algorithms, like things that you have specifically worked on are literally in my phone right now or in my computer out there in the webs. Mm-hmm. And so you are actually one of these architects of the Matrix.
That is true. Yeah, man.
That's a trip.
That is. I hadn't thought about it like that, but it is true. I've written a lot of code that is used by lots of people. And, I'd like to think it's used for good, but then I wonder if I even know what is good. So,
right.
So I can tell you some things like, because I studied the brain, we started working on algorithms to study networks and how networks communicate and how to find things that have gone awry in networks and all sorts of stuff like that. And we did it from the perspective of kind of like foundational statistics, things that people have been working on for 100 years. People hadn't quite brought it into collections of networks yet. So we did a lot of that work. And then it turns out to be extremely useful for things like finding sex traffickers in the dark web, because they're communicating in networks. And so we had the best algorithms that would enable people to align networks and find people who are doing that kind of thing. So that's a way that I think hopefully is serving some good. Another way it's possibly you've used it is in Microsoft Search. If you search for certain products on the side, it would tell you other things like that are related to that. That's using my algorithms.
Wow.
Or at least at a time it was. Maybe it's replaced now. But
so you're responsible for all my impulse shopping online?
I am. It's interesting. I am partially responsible for that. And that's something I have.
How do you sleep at night, Joshua? How do you sleep? How do you sleep with yourself, knowing that you're causing me to overshop and overspend?
Usually with like one or two babies on my chest. And
yeah. Wow, that's cool. That's cool to know that's a part of the work that's going on. So that leads me to, the question of simulation, because I imagine when you're looking at all these networks, the question has to pop up like, wait, has this happened before? Are we, in fact, the product of a previous intelligence who wanted to create another reality of intelligence? And are we, in fact, living in a simulation? What's your answer?
Well, I'll just tell you, a good friend of mine is working on trying to simulate a C. elegans. C. elegans is a very small worm with about 300 neurons and a few thousand connections between the neurons. Just in contrast to us, we have about 86 billion neurons and 1,000 trillion connections. So it's like 12 orders of magnitude different in terms of scale. That friend is trying to raise $100 million to simulate one C. elegans. And that simulation will require probably 1 billion times more energy than it takes for a C. elegans to actually run itself, and will require probably about a 1 billion times bigger computer and 1 billion times, maybe not 1 billion times, maybe like 1 million times slower than the C. elegans does it.
Just for one worm.
One little worm.
Wow.
So like, we're a real complicated simulation if that's what's happening, and it would take a lot of power to do it. And like, if you had the power to do that, like, why would you do that?
Why would you do it? Because we're curious, and actually we are doing it. Like for the kids who collect ant colonies and watch what happens, not to create it, but to observe it, to witness, maybe even to learn from it in some regard. And when you're saying it takes a bigger computer, or more power. I was thinking like, you mean like the sun? Is what we call God creator, prime creator. Prime creator meaning, creator of all. It's something to consider. As someone who's read the Torah, no doubt, let's come back into the spirituality. Like, how do you reckon with God amidst all of this intelligence, artificial intelligence, consciousness? How do you see that?
Tend to think like, oh, I don't know. That's complicated, man. Like,
yeah.
Like God, like I barely understand myself, much less some being that could create the entire universe and all the laws of physics that would run for billions of years. Like, that's way more complicated than me, and I don't have me yet. So I'm gonna just focus on me.
Yeah. And there is, even though you're throwing your arms up like, who knows, there is a sense of knowing, because if you're focusing on you and you come from God, then there's a part of you that's a little tiny drop of God down here on planet Earth. If we're the creation in God's image, we have to at some point come into the ownership of the idea that we are God's creation, and that makes us little tiny gods here on Earth to steward and to hold domain.
Right. There's a beautiful story of this old rabbi who he had two different pieces of paper in two different pockets. And one of them had said, like, I'm created in the image of God. And the other one said, I'm but the dust of the earth. And he would pull out the one that was appropriate for if he was like overly self-aggrandizing or overly self-flagellating, to remind him to lean the other way and be in the middle. And so, my perspective on that is, sure, I'm happy to accept that we're all created in the image of God, as long as we accept that that's true of everything and everyone.
Yes, that's true of everything and everyone. I think the world could use a dose of that right now.
Yeah. Can
we see God in our perceived enemies, and who told us that they were enemies in the first place? Right? Like, can we come out of the story that we were born into and truly, I'll say what I said previously, come back into the awareness that all life is sacred.
I sometimes, when I'm like in the story of thinking I know what's right and wrong and who's bad, I like just think about, well, like, okay, are there any bad waves? No bad waves. Bad trees? No bad trees. Bad lions? No bad lions. Any bad babies? No bad babies. Not. So like, somewhere I must have decided that when baby humans get older, A, it's possible for them to get bad, unlike everything else in existence. And B, I'm the one that knows the answer of whether or not they're the bad one. Right. Like, that just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't seem right, and it's certainly not something to push in all our chips on, to name that. And that's a struggle for a lot of us right now, because while people who are outside of any conflict, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, or whether it's the Democratic Republic of Congo versus the consumer culture that we are in, to stand in our arrogance of knowing like what is good or bad, or claiming to be on the side of righteousness, I think that may be a disservice. And it may be again, like feeding that egocentric model. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do we step in and own the fact, like, we don't know what we don't know, but how do we step in to do some good? In my view, and what I'm finding that works, is picking up the phone, like I started this conversation, and actually talking to someone and asking them how they are, and dropping in from a place of compassion and curiosity. That's a good starting point.
I'm with you. And also, like, owning our shit, right? Like, Diana Chapman, who started the Conscious Leadership Group and wrote the 15 Commitments book, she said to me, like, we were talking about this, and she said, I really don't like it when you beat that dog. Like, I don't like it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I want you to stop, and I don't like it. And I think there's great power in being like, I don't like what's happening in the Congo or in Ukraine, and I want the world to be different, and I'm willing to do things to make it look different without saying that I know what's right, without saying I know who's wrong.
Yes. We have to come out of the illusion of the duality of things being good or bad. And also we have to stop pushing that storyline to our children. Because like I said, when my kids watch those shows and they're like, bad guys, bad guys, bad guys, I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a mouse and a cat. You know?
Yeah. I was at our kids' school, and they were talking about one of the things they were doing in the school and how there's like a bad dragon or something, and they're like fighting it in the story. And I just raised my hand. I said, like, I'm sorry, I don't believe in evil. And all the parents and teachers were like, like, what? Like, I don't believe in it. No, you can teach that to them, but I'm going to reinforce it at home. Like, I don't believe in it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly the application of bad action, of evil intention. And we see that, we experience that in all kinds of ways. And we also know that change is inevitable. If for nothing else, everything is in motion. And so utilizing our life force energy as an act for the change that we wish to see is really the only way to walk. And it's not about making posts on Instagram or like othering the people that you don't like. It's about taking a step, taking an action, actually creating more space for love. I think that's the most maybe command that we have here is like what's in our immediate field. And I love what you said. It's like, when I jokingly asked you, how do you sleep at night? You're like, with my children and my beloved in a comfortable bed with beautiful sheets. Creating the space for the love in your own home is actually what matters.
Certainly where I start. And then I hope it resonates out. But the reality is the things I have control over is like how much energy I put into these muscles. And that's the extent of it, man. Like I can hope flexing them in various positions leads to greater flourishing for my family. But the reality is what I control is like, do I lift this thing up now or not? Do I open this mouth like this now or not?
Yeah. Beautiful. Jovo, you're a gem. You're a beautiful member of this community of Sacred Sons. I appreciate you with all of your breadth of experience. You know what I'm saying? You're a professor. You founded multiple companies and organizations, and you still showed up amongst Sacred Sons because you believed that you had work to do. And I find that admirable. I really do, because we're in a day and time where people are feeling so righteous, or that they know, or that they can utilize their life force to create the destructive action on this planet. And so for you to take the time to go inward as you are having, all of this impact, I think it's needed. I think you're an example of what it could look like when powerful people do this level of work.
Thank you. I want to say that it was a few years ago, I would have said, I don't need to do that. But then I had a little bit strange to say, but the good fortune of like a bunch of shit going down that really fucking sucked for me.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I do not have this figured out at all. And then that's when my wife found Sacred Sons for me. And I was like, oh, here's a community of brothers that turns out we're all one. And I can really feel the humanity and see that wherever we come from, we're all going through, we all have the same heartbreak. We all bleed the same blood, and we all love our families, and we want to be doing good by them and for us.
Yeah.
It's been profound and beautiful. The most accepting community of people I've ever been a part of.
We're doing something right. We're doing something right over here. And let that be a call in if you're out there listening. And I know I meet brothers that experience this now pretty regularly who are like, I've been listening to podcasts for years, and I'm just now at the point where I feel like I need this, like you're saying, right? Or I'm looking for that community. So let that be a call in. If you're out there and you're hearing what Joshua's saying, join Sacred Sons, come to an event, get with the brotherhood. It's time. Yeah. Joshua, with that, is there any final prayer, any words that you would like to leave with the brothers and the sisters who are listening?
And what comes to me, I was in Jamaica at the Blue Hole. It's like amazing thing in Earth where it's just this deep cavern, and then in the bottom of it is this mineral water, and it's just remarkably healing. And I was in there by myself. My kids, my wife were up at the top, and I was like, what's the prayer now? And the prayer for me is like more clarity of mind, more peace of heart, and more strength of body. I wish that for us all.
Clarity of mind, peace in heart, and strength of body. Jovo, blessings on your journey in this life and in everything you do. Appreciate you being, a brother and a friend, truly.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
All right. With that, Joshua Vogelstein, Adam Jackson, Sacred Sons, Route Family. Peace.